So, when I first became a reporter about 30 years ago, one of the reasons, I wanted to be able to tell stories, but I also felt like I didn't know anything. And I also felt like I was a really self-centered person, like I didn't really know a lot about other people because I hadn't made the effort to do that. And so I thought, well, I know, I'll become a reporter. I'll talk to other people, I'll get to find out about their, their hopes, their fears, the things that they like, the things that they don't like, their joys and their sorrows. And so I started doing that as a reporter. And for the most part, it's worked out pretty well. But there's one thing in that list that's never really gotten any easier over all those years. And that is talking to someone who's just had a terrible loss, someone who's lost a son or a daughter or a husband or a wife. And it's one of those things that at times we have to do as a reporter. But it's never easy. And there are many times when I thought, I don't really want to do this. I don't really want to knock on that door. And that brings me to Araceli Rodriguez. So, on October 10th, 2012, there was a 16-year-old boy named Jose Antonio who was walking down the street in Nogales, on the Mexican side. There's a street called Calle Internacional that runs just below the fence. And he was walking along that street about 11:30 at night. And shots rang out from across the other side of the fence, and he was hit and killed. We heard about it the next day. I heard about it from a Mexican radio station, and called the Border Patrol. The Border Patrol does not put out press releases. They don't ever announce when they're involved in a use of force incident. You have to find out about it and then go to them. Because the allegation was that a Border Patrol agent had fired the shots. And so I called the Border Patrol, and they put out, as they usually do, a sort of cryptic statement saying that an agent, they don't identify them, unlike the police departments and sheriff's departments, they don't ever identify people. They said that an agent had been trying to apprehend some suspected drug smugglers when rocks came flying over the fence, and in self-defense he had fired, and he might have hit somebody. Well, there was really no might about it. He'd shot the kid 10 times in the back, and he had died. So photographer Charlie Light and I went down to Nogales, and we went across to the Mexican side, and I started asking around, and I got directions to his family's house, which was up about 3 or 4 blocks from the border on this very steep hill. And when I got there, the bunch of family had gathered. They were all outside, and I started talking to them and explaining why I was there, and eventually talked my way inside and got to talk to the mother, Araceli Rodriguez. And in our conversation, she actually told me quite a bit. She had several other kids. She had a hard time economically. She was a single mother, and she'd had to leave Nogales and go to another city about 120 miles west of there to work. So she'd left the kids with their grandmother, and a number of other details that don't really matter. The one thing that really stood out for me in that conversation was when she said, "Quiero saber quién mató a mi niño, y quiero mirarle en la cara y preguntarle por qué. I want to know who killed my son, and I want to look him in the eye, and I want to ask him why." So we left her house, and we went down to the place where this had happened, where the kid had been shot. It's pretty easy to find because there's a big pool of dried blood, and bullets pockmarking the wall of the building behind him, where he died. And there was something that really struck me immediately about this. So, I don't know if any of you have ever seen the border fence in Nogales, but there's a concrete base, and then you have these big metal poles about this wide that go up. And there's a space in between each pole. It's maybe about like this wide, about the width of my fingertips. And at that particular spot, there's a bluff on the US side, so that if you're standing down in the street in Mexico, and you're throwing a rock, which is what this kid was supposedly doing, according to the Border Patrol. If you're throwing a rock, I mean, you're heaving it over a 3-story building, essentially. You're throwing it way up there. And that rock, of course, has to follow an arc. you know, it's like physics. If you're standing where this kid was standing and you're throwing a rock, it's going to land 20, 25 feet on the other side of the fence. So here's the thing. Because there's that little tiny gap in the fence, the only way that you can shoot someone standing in the street below is to be right at the fence. If you're back 20, 25 feet where the rocks are coming to hit you and you fire, that bullet's going to go 2 miles into Nogales. God knows where it's going to end up. But if you're shooting down like this, you're right at the fence where you cannot possibly be hit by a rock. So right away, there was some elements of the story that really did not add up. And when we got back to Phoenix, I started doing, you know, my job as a reporter, talking to people, trying to find out more. Made a couple of more trips to Nogales over the subsequent months. Filed a whole ton of public records requests and information requests, looking into not just this case, but a lot of other use of force cases that had happened along the border. And found a couple of other witnesses who told me that, in fact, the boy had just been walking along the street, that other people had run away just seconds before the firing started, but that this boy had just been walking down the street. He had, as his family insisted, been walking down to meet his brother who worked at a convenience store just 2 blocks away, as he was just about to get off shift. I filed more than 150 public records requests and many, many appeals, and fought for about a year to get a lot of records. And we eventually wound up getting 13,000 pages of documents from the Border Patrol, including every use of force incident that had happened along the border for 5 years, except one. That one. And we did eventually get that one as well. But at this point, we had all these other reports. And when I started looking at them, there were a couple of things that became very apparent as we did this analysis. Now, Rob O'Dell, another reporter who's not here tonight, but who gets dragooned into this kind of thing because he's really good with data, he and I spent 6 weeks plowing through these reports, morning, noon, and night, transcribing them, changing the formats so that because they send them in a data format that's impossible to use, and then going through the information. And we found a couple of things that I thought were really fascinating. Number one was, Border Patrol agents on the whole are extremely reticent to use deadly force. Now, you know, being a Border Patrol agent is like being a cop. It's a tough job. And it's not as dangerous as some jobs, but it's, you know, there can be dangers there. And it's like being a cop. It's tough. And most of the time, most agents are extremely careful about using force. There are many cases that we found where I would have pulled out a gun and shot, and they didn't. You know, where a guy was wrestling and trying to grab the gun, and the agent found a way to resolve the situation without killing anybody. I mean, it was amazing how many times they were so careful. The other thing we found, though, was that there were a couple of dozen cases, 36, in which agents had killed people under extremely questionable circumstances. Kids shot in the back. Somebody beaten to death because he was supposedly resisting arrest, and then a cell phone video surfaces that, in fact, he was lying on his back with his hands cuffed behind his back. Lying on his face with his hands cuffed behind his back when he was tased 5 times and beaten to death. Videos in a couple of these cases were the key factor. And in fact, there was a video in this case, too, in Jose Antonio's death. There was a camera mounted on the border fence that had a direct view down on both sides of the fence, infrared cameras and video cameras. And I'd been requesting, I filed public records requests for that video. They did not turn it over. So anyway, I'm going through, doing this reporting, and after about a year, I went back down to Nogales, and I saw Araceli Rodriguez again. She had organized a huge protest march with the help of some groups to try to bring attention to this case so that it wouldn't just vanish into the ether. And when I went down there, before the march, I talked with her, and she explained to me that things had, in some ways, you know, she'd been able to get the bank that she was working for to transfer her back to Nogales, so she was now together with her kids, and so she was glad about that. But the thing was, the bank where she worked was right there along the fence. So every day, she would go to work, and she would see Border Patrol agents on the other side of the fence, driving in their cars or just standing there. And every time she looked at one, she would think, is that the one? Is that the one who killed my son? She eventually got the help of the ACLU and filed a lawsuit against the John Doe who had killed her son. And the attorneys for the Border Patrol and for the agent tried to keep his name from being released. The Arizona Republic intervened in that case, and we were able to get the name of the agent, Lonnie Schwartz, released. And I got a little bit of information. I eventually managed to track down and report that particular incident report. I've been trying to talk with Mr. Schwartz. He won't give me an interview. His attorneys do not want him to talk. That's perhaps understandable. The FBI has still kept that case open, as they do with many of these cases. They'll keep them open for years, so that you don't have any access to the files or the information as long as that's open. As a result of the reporting that we did and finding all these thousands of cases and going through them, there have been some effects. We did a huge series of stories that were helpful in leading the Border Patrol to first release for the first time publicly their use of force policies, and then to actually change those policies to restrict the circumstances under which agents can use deadly force. So that, for example, the fact that someone is throwing a rock doesn't automatically mean that you can use deadly force. You have to consider the particular circumstances and whether you're actually in danger. They also said that they're going to start reinvestigating some of these cases, because one of the other things that we found was that in all the use of force deaths going back to 2004, there has never been an agent who has been disciplined or who's been charged with anything in any of those deaths. Now, her case is about next week, her case is about to be heard in Tucson, in the Federal District Court of Tucson. And there's an interesting thing, because the judge there in this case is going to consider whether or not her lawsuit can go forward. Because there's a kind of a funny thing about the legal limbo that exists along the border. If I'm on the US side of the border and I shoot you over there on the Mexican side, the Mexican courts don't have jurisdiction over me because I'm on the US side. And by the way, the US doesn't ever extradite people to Mexico for these kinds of incidents. But if you try to sue me in US court, well, the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals in Texas just ruled in a case last year that because the bullet is striking you and killing you in Mexico, it's outside US jurisdiction. In other words, there is no one, there is no venue that you can turn to for justice. None. I talked with Araceli again, not long ago. And she will not be in Tucson for the hearing. She can't get a visa. So she will be waiting in Nogales to find out what happened. Her attorneys will call her afterwards and let her know. The one thing she told me in our most recent conversation was this, which was, I will never let this go. I will never stop. I want to know why, and I will never stop until I get that answer. Now, I don't know if she'll get that answer or not. I don't know if Mr. Schwartz will talk. I don't know if the case will be dismissed. I don't know if it'll get appealed all the way to the US Supreme Court. What I can do, the one thing I know I can do, and the one reason that I'm really glad that I went up and knocked on her door that day, even though I felt really apprehensive about doing it, and I got her to sit down and talk to me when there were tears running down her cheeks, was that I can share her story with you. Thank you.